It began with a storm. The kind of storm that feels alive, twisting through valleys, bending trees, and soaking every surface until sounds blurred together into one low roar. In the summer of 1997, in the quiet reaches of northern Idaho, a family of 5 camped in the Blue Pines Mountains. They had driven up narrow roads in a tired old station wagon, watching the dust swirl behind them until pines swallowed the horizon. It seemed ordinary, a simple trip planned for fishing, hiking, and nights beside a fire. Nothing in those first hours hinted at the nightmare waiting just beyond the ridge. Mark Porter worked as a mechanic, his hands permanently scarred by grease and steel. His wife Sharon split her time between raising children and working part-time at the library, the kind of woman who found comfort in stories and carried that comfort into her daughters' lives. The 3 girls were 10 years old that July. They shared a face but not a personality. Emily was the quiet one, sketching pine needles in her little green notebook and filling margins with words too big for her age. Hannah, restless and daring, pushed boundaries by climbing higher, running further, never frightened of scratches or scrapes. Claire, the peacekeeper, laughed easily and brought her sisters back together whenever their differences pulled them apart. Together they seemed more like 3 currents of one river, impossible to split apart, moving always in rhythm. The first day was idyllic. The sisters splashed in the creek, throwing handfuls of glittering water toward each other while their voices filtered through the trees. Mark fried fish over a cast-iron pan, while Sharon laid out sandwiches and juice boxes on a soft blanket. Sun speared through the tree canopy. Insects hovered in shifting rays of light, and the air carried a sweetness unique to summer in the Northwest. Other campers passed occasionally, nodding and greeting. No one felt unsafe. The Blue Pines were quieter than national parks, less crowded, almost homely in their calm. Sharon believed the mountains were safe. That was the word she used in conversations with neighbors, safe. But mountains are only safe until the moment they are not. On the second evening, clouds pressed low, and thunder rolled across the ridge like an advancing wall. Horses carrying 2 men had passed earlier that day, their hats tipped politely, one of them glancing back too long at the children. Sharon saw it and tucked it away in her mind, dismissing her own unease. In the 1990s, parents worried more about accidents than abductions. Distrust was not yet the default. As thunder deepened, Mark urged his family back to camp. They ate quickly, huddled under tarps. Then the girls were zipped into their tent. Sharon kissed each forehead, smoothing blankets and whispering that tomorrow morning they would walk to the lake. The rain arrived before midnight, slow taps turning into sheets of water that hammered nylon as winds whipped trees sideways. The storm lasted for hours. Mark and Sharon lay awake listening to every flicker of sound from beyond the tent walls. At one moment she swore she heard footsteps crunching against mud, a rhythm too deliberate to be branches or rain alone. Mark told her it was only the storm, echoing movements in the dark. Lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled like a cannon overhead, and both parents stared into the dark, waiting for dawn. When morning arrived, everything had changed. The storm was gone, leaving streams of water still dripping from low branches and the smell of wet earth dense in the air. Sharon unzipped the girls' tent, expecting to find them tangled in blankets, rubbing eyes awake. Instead, she found 3 empty sleeping bags. She shouted their names. Panic rose instantly. Mark tore through undergrowth, screaming until his throat stung. Sharon dropped to the ground, scratching at mud with her fingers as if answers were buried there. At first, they told themselves the girls had simply wandered to the creek, chasing something in the night. But the ground showed no tracks, nothing to prove which direction they had gone. Within hours, the campground transformed from a holiday site into a search operation. Another family helped first, then Mark drove frantically down the mountain to the ranger station. By the end of the day, deputies, rangers, and volunteers spread through the forest. Helicopters scoured ridgelines with searchlights, their noise shaking trees. Volunteers formed human chains, sweeping tall grass and trail sides. Dogs tried valiantly to follow scents, but the rain had washed away every trace. The porter's yellow tent collapsed under caution tape, became a mute witness to the night everything broke apart. Dogs barked at shadows, searchers shouted into canyons, and every echo triggered a fleeting spark of hope, followed by heavier silence. The days blended, sleepless hours stretching through wet clothes and endless questions. Headlines spread outward, 3 sisters missing in Idaho campground. News vans lined dirt roads, cameras recorded every hour as Sharon cried into microphones and Mark stood grim and still, face unreadable. Some viewers questioned his stoicism, whispering theories about hidden guilt. Others wept watching Sharon's pleas. Each angle of suffering turned into speculation. Investigators pursued leads. The horsemen were interviewed. One, Roy Dent, claimed he never returned near the porter's camp after the storm frightened his horse. Another was a drifter with little known background. Their names appeared in tabloids, but searchers found nothing linking them to a crime. The group of miners up at the ridge were interrogated as well. They were loud, drunk, careless, but no evidence tied them to the disappearance. Suspicion then turned uncomfortably inward. Journalists noted how calm Mark appeared. Under pressure, detectives asked blunt questions no parent wants to hear. Had he struck the girls? Was there insurance? Mark denied it all. Co-workers and neighbors vouched for him, yet the seed of doubt, once planted, lingered. Sharon defended him fiercely, shouting in frustration that energy was being wasted on the wrong target. But even she struggled at night when camera lights shut off and silence grew sharp. The official search extended through August. Helicopters, divers in lakes, volunteers crossing dangerous ridges. No evidence surfaced. Not a shoe, not a ribbon, not a scrap of cloth. It was as if the mountain itself had swallowed the children. By September, the county announced the search had failed. The porters packed their belongings, the yellow tent folded into the car like a cruel echo of happier days. Back home, their lives did not move forward. Mark worked longer shifts, his body seeking exhaustion to drown the images haunting him. Sharon could not close the girls' rooms. Their beds remained precisely as they had left them. Drawers still scattered with crayons, homework papers still tacked to corkboards. Every birthday was marked with candles burning over uneaten cakes. In her heart, she told herself closure was still possible. She walked the ridge alone every anniversary, begging the mountain to give up its secret. The case cooled year after year. Detectives moved on, files thinned. Rumors hardened into folklore. Children growing up nearby were warned not to wander near the ridge at night. Mothers whispered it was where the triplets had disappeared. Theories proliferated in absence of fact. Some said they had drowned. Some believed in cult sacrifice. Some swore the mountain cursed those who camped beneath its trees. None could explain why no trace had ever been found. By 2001, the strain fractured the marriage. Sharon filed for separation. She could not endure Mark's silence, his refusal to unravel memories aloud. He, in turn, could not endure her obsession, living every day in the nightmare of retracing instead of accepting loss. Neither could bridge the differences. Their house and their marriage both carried too much emptiness. Years passed. Sharon remained vocal, speaking at conferences for parents of missing children, printing posters year after year, pleading to anyone still paying attention. Mark retreated into shadows, giving no more interviews, refusing vigils. By the 10th anniversary, fewer townspeople came to public memorials. For many, the case had become just another old file from the 90s, a wound the community would rather stop touching. But nature does not forget. It holds everything until erosion, accident, or weather decides to loosen the grip. In spring 2010, another storm hammered the Blue Pine Mountains. Torrents buckled trails, ripped trees by their roots, and collapsed hillsides long sealed. Locals said it was a storm that rearranged the very bones of the mountain. Weeks later, when hikers tested the eroded ridges, one noticed a black mouth gaping from a slope. It had not been there before. Rotting planks held loose, soil peeled back, an old mine shaft revealed. He mentioned it in town casually at first, but the sheriff remembered. 13 years earlier, he had promised a mother he would never stop searching. Now the mountain seemed to open its throat. Deputies entered cautiously with flashlights. Inside, only a short distance from the opening, they saw fabric snagged against timbers. They logged it, unable yet to prove its origin. Later came a sneaker, hardened with time, still the size of a child's. Then, deeper, a spiral notebook, swollen and blurred, but containing drawings recognizable after a glance. Emily's sketches of pine needles and birds. When evidence was carried back to the station, Sharon wept silently, clutching at the fabric. She whispered her daughter's names as if speaking them into air would call them back. Mark refused to attend. He said he could not survive another false hope. Still, the shaft became a crime scene, patrolled day and night. In August 2010, searchers found bones. 3 sets, small, of identical age. Dental records confirmed what Hartz already knew. The triplets had never left the mountain. They had been here all along, sealed beneath rock and wood. Forensic work revealed horrors beyond drowning or misstep. Rope fragments knotted, rusted metal restraints, a leather strap. These were not tools belonging to children. They belonged to control. Someone had bound them. Someone had ensured they would not walk away, and then someone had sealed the shaft. The implications shook the town. For over a decade, people had soothed themselves with softer myths, that the girls had wandered too far, that nature alone was cruel. Now it became unavoidable. This was not the work of storm or mountain. This was human act, deliberate and cold. Investigations pried through county archives. Maps from the 1980s labeled shafts across that ridge. One marked hazardous had been sealed by a company called Grey Rock Limited. But those maps were missing from public files during the original search. A retired clerk admitted years later she had been pressured to remove them. It was not oversight. It had been choice. The deeper deputies searched, the uglier it grew. The shaft carried more evidence beyond the bones. A crate contained journals. The handwriting was unstable, scribbled with religious fragments and schedules. Mixed in the ramblings were lines referring to assets kept underground. Initialed R.D. The name belonged to Roy Dent, the ranch hand seen on horseback the day before the storm. The man briefly questioned, then released without further suspicion. Forensic tests matched sweat traces on fabric to his surviving relatives. Roy had used the shaft, likely supported by Grey Rock, who employed him as a sort of watchman during their quiet, perhaps illegal, use of the mines. Corporate money flowed quietly his way months before the disappearance. He was a guard in theory, but a predator behind closed eyes. He had died in 2003. His secrets would have stayed sealed if weather had not torn the ground open. Sheriff deputies pieced together the conclusion. Roy had taken the girls into the shaft on that stormy night. He restrained them, perhaps with promises or threats. He confined them, then sealed the entrance, leaving them trapped in absolute dark. Whether he returned again or left them immediately would never be known, but evidence made one fact certain: the girls had been alive when the entrance closed. Public outrage consumed the town. Reporters returned. Sharon repeated into cameras that her daughters had not disappeared. They had been hidden, buried by human negligence and human cruelty. She stood at courthouse steps demanding names and justice, though justice now lived only in documents and shadows. Roy was dead, officials long since retired, Grey Rock fined, but individuals untouched. Mark remained mostly silent, his grief having calcified into stone. Privately, he confessed to deputies something he had never told Sharon, that in the storm's midnight roar he had heard voices outside. He persuaded himself they were nothing. For 13 years it lived inside him as doubt, now revealed as a painful confession. The shaft was resealed, with engineers reinforcing the slope. At its mouth stood 3 wooden crosses, each carved with a name: Emily, Hannah, Claire. Each anniversary, candles gathered at their base, flickering up against the stone. Hikers avoided the ridge, whispering that the mountain had swallowed children once and might again. But Sharon stood there each year, whispering that her daughters were never lost, they had always been waiting. The Blue Pine case became more than a tragedy. It became evidence of what silence costs. Neighbors, officials, corporations, all choosing convenience over confrontation. The girls had not disappeared into wilderness. They had been forced inside a chamber and left while the world searched just steps above their heads. A storm had kept the truth hidden. A later storm had given it back. For investigators, the case lived as a scar. For Sharon, it lived as mission. She spoke the girls' names again and again to anyone who would listen: Emily, Hannah, Claire. Their absence, she insisted, could still teach others what must never be allowed to repeat. And in the final image, the mountain appears silent, but its silence no longer hides. Crosses stand against stone. Pine branches shift in the wind. Somewhere a mother whispers into air, promising her daughters they are remembered. The truth is simple, if unbearable. Those girls were not swallowed by wilderness. They were trapped by human hands, and only rain, wind, and time set their evidence free.